So today we are jumping straight into the story of Noor Nagar. Now, on the surface, this might just seem like a simple fairy tale, but honestly, if you look a little deeper, it is actually an absolute masterclass for beginners on going from zero to hero. If you've ever had to start something without a single resource to your name, this explainer is definitely for you. Look, let me ask you something right off the bat. Have you ever felt like you're starting a totally new journey? You have zero resources, and you're going up against people who just seem to have it all. We often brush off fairy tales, we think they're just entertainment for kids. But that exact struggle bridges the gap between this magical world and our actual, real-world struggles as beginners. We have all been at that starting line where we have this massive vision, but zero tools to build it. Let's see how the story of Noor Nagar tackles this exact problem.
All right, let's get into our first major takeaway. Starting out when you literally have zero resources. It's the classic beginner versus the elite dynamic. And every great journey starts with a matchup that looks completely one-sided. The contrast between our two main characters here is just fascinating. On one side, we have Sarah. Sarah is the ultimate beginner. I mean, she doesn't even own a sewing machine. She stitches everything by hand. She's incredibly poor, but she is relentlessly hardworking. She totally represents that raw beginner mindset where you basically have to rely purely on grit and raw talent. And then on the other side, we've got Tanira. Tanira is rich, dripping in expensive clothes and jewelry, but she's completely lazy and arrogant. She prides herself entirely on her resources and looks down on Sarah. It is the textbook example of an elite mindset that relies on having the best tools rather than, actually putting in the work. And this is where the inciting incident hits. The fairy queen announces a massive challenge. Whoever wins the fancy dress competition gets to live in the palace as the royal designer. Now for Sarah, this is a huge beacon of hope. But what do Tanira and her friends do? They just laugh at her. They're like, you don't even have a machine and you think you can compete? And for anyone starting out in the real world, that kind of mockery is all too familiar, right? When the established players just laugh at your lack of resources. Which brings us to our next phase. Building your own foundation. The most crucial detail right here is that Sarah doesn't argue back when they mock her. Actually, scratch that, she doesn't even engage. She just quietly walks away. She knows she has to go out and acquire her own tools no matter how grueling the effort is going to be. When you're starting from absolute zero, maintaining your determination is everything. And this is perfectly captured in Sarah's internal thoughts. She says, "Today, I have gathered myself again. I have to smile a little. With these vegetables and flowers, I have to decorate my little dream." She knows she can't just magically buy a sewing machine overnight. She has to start with exactly what she has in front of her, which is vegetables and flowers. That is just the ultimate lesson for a beginner. You have to accept your current reality and push forward anyway. Talk about a grind. Just look at her daily routine. With the very first light of morning, she's digging soil, planting seeds, growing flowers to sell at the market. But knowing that's not enough, she spends her entire afternoon washing dishes and scrubbing clothes at a big house. And at night, she carefully stashes every single penny she earns into a little tin box. To put that into perspective, this illustrates that to fund your true passion, to get that fast golden sewing machine she needed, you often have to take on those completely unglamorous side hustles. But finally, after days and nights of relentless work, she buys the machine. But here's the catch. As you make progress, the challenges level up too. You eventually have to face the external threats, the sabotage, the jealousy. Sarah's hard work and that shiny new golden sewing machine did not sit well with Tanira. The elite competitor was actually starting to get scared. And then, literally the night before the deadline, disaster strikes. While Sarah is asleep, totally exhausted after finally finishing her beautiful gown, Tanira and her friend sneak into the hut. They violently tear apart the gown Sarah had stitched with so much hope, and they steal the golden sewing machine she bought with her blood, sweat, and tears. It's devastating. It's the worst moment in a beginner's journey, when a competitor comes in and completely wipes out the tiny bit of resources you managed to scrape together. Put yourself in her shoes for a second. Imagine you've poured your heart and soul into your first major project, and right before the deadline, someone completely destroys it. What's your very next move? Do you just throw in the towel? Because this is exactly the defining moment that separates an ordinary beginner from a champion. This leads right into the rebuild phase, bouncing back from total disaster. When Sarah wakes up the next morning and sees the absolute devastation in her hut, her reaction is, well, it's a masterclass in itself. We can actually extract a totally brilliant beginner's bounce-back procedure directly from what she does next. Look, Sarah wasn't a robot.
Step 1, she allowed herself to cry. She wept for a long time, which is completely human and necessary. But then she wiped her tears. Step 2, she assessed what she had left. All she had were torn scraps of fabric and a few scattered beads. Step 3, she pivoted. She completely changed her design based on those remaining scraps and started rebuilding the gown by hand, no machine. That kind of resilience, that is a beginner's truest superpower. Okay, so now we are at the final showdown, hard work versus pure arrogance. The competition at the palace had already kicked off. Tanira is strutting across the stage in her bright green dress, basically acting like she had already won the crown. She was absolutely certain that Sarah was broken and wouldn't even show up. But then, at the literal last second, Sarah walks in. When she enters that grand hall, everyone is left totally speechless. Tanira just freezes in her tracks. Sarah's gown is shining like stars. No one had ever seen a dress so magical. And the absolute best part? It was crafted entirely from the discarded, torn scraps that Tanira had ruined. It proves once and for all that the real magic isn't in your tools. It is entirely in your creativity and your hustle. And finally, the fairy queen delivers her verdict. She tells the crowd, hard work, courage, and truth are the real paths to dreams. She crowns Sarah the royal fashion designer. Sarah gets a beautiful room in the palace, and yes, she gets a brand new, expensive sewing machine. It's such a great metaphor, right? When you give it your absolute best, even without resources, the resources eventually find their way to you. So let's distill this down. What are the ultimate takeaways for us beginners? First, a lack of resources is not a curse. It actually forces you to be incredibly creative. If Sarah still had her machine, she probably never would have created that miraculous patchwork gown. Second, your authenticity and raw effort will always outshine expensive tools. And third, resilience, your ability to bounce back from a disaster, is your ultimate competitive moat. Literally nobody can steal that from you. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want you to ask yourself honestly, what is the sewing machine that you are waiting for before you start building your dream? Are you waiting for the perfect time, the perfect equipment, maybe the perfect funding? Sarah's story teaches us to just stop waiting. Take whatever scraps you have today and start weaving your future with your own two hands. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.